finally we are moving that conversation along. Because I think, especially in certain parts of the world, there's this notion around the fact that certain types of work is better than others. I think we need to move away from these labels around blue collar work, white collar work. I've seen some people refer to it as golden collar work as well. There's work to be done. People have got different skill sets, they've got different attributes, they've got different contributions to make. I think what I love about the article that we are talking about is the fact that we are now starting to say that regardless of where your work takes place and what's the nature of your work, there has to be certain elements around you that's beneficial to you in terms of your employee experience. Good day, everyone. It's really great to have you with us, and welcome to the AIHR newsroom. Before we dive into the topics today, remember to subscribe and hit the like button.
Welcome to the HR newsroom. I'm Erik van Vulpen, and with me is Dieter Veldsman. And today, as you're used in this format, we'll talk about some of the stories that we read in the news in the past month, and we'll see how they impact the future of work and the future of the HR profession. With that, we have some amazing topics coming up, and I would love to kick off with our first story today. The title of the story is Grocery App Gorillas drops the 10-minute delivery pledge and adds store pickup options. Gorilla is one of the super fast delivery companies that promises to deliver within 10 or 15 minutes. Personally, I have to admit I'm a big fan and a big user, and I frequently in a week order through Gorillas. So I'm in that sense very much guilty, but specifically in New York City, it became unattainable to keep that pledge because of workplace safety reasons. Delivery people would be very dangerous, cross streets, not wait for red lights. It led to a 54-year-old woman in Queens passing away after an accident with an electrical bike. So they're essentially Gorillas dropped the pledge to deliver within 10 minutes. And I think, Dieter, this opens the discussion for us on where is the match between, on the one hand, the customer value proposition and the promise you make to your customers, we deliver within 10 or 15 minutes. And on the other hand, there's the workforce that needs to deliver it. Where is that balance?
And I think this is a tricky one for me, Erik, listening, to you almost describing the process, because I think on the one end, there's the competitor in me that says, yes, but we will deliver. It's good to strive, stretch goals. How are we going to differentiate ourselves in the market? And then on the other side, I'm thinking about the delivery individual on the Gorilla's bike that is chasing down, to reach your house at 5 to 11. Otherwise, you're going to go to the competitor. And I think there's something here just around what is it that can we deliver on what we actually promise to the client? And do we understand what the internal consequences of that particular promise is going to be? In the EVP world, in the employee value proposition world, we very often talk about the fact that align your employee value proposition with your CVP, with your customer value proposition, so that it's authentic and so that it's aligned. But what do we do when that leads towards, can I call it, dangerous or detrimental behavior? Do you think we should then change our customer promise, or should we do something different internally?
I think it's a good question, and it will always be a case-to-case decision, and the answer is then always it depends, Dieter. But I think what's interesting, of course, we had Tesla a couple of years ago promising to create an X amount of thousands of cars, even though they were at very small scale. And then you saw people working day and night, and I think most famously Elon Musk not leaving the factory and sleeping on the factory floor in order to realize that promise. And then we talk about an aspirational company that is changing the world. But on the EVP and on the employee side of things, there is a much darker reality. There's people working who barely see their children because they need to deliver an X amount of cars. So I think it will always be a tension between the ambitions and that's the competitor inside of you, Dieter, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the realist, and how far can you go with the workforce that you're leading?
I want to take it back to the role that HR plays in this conversation, because I can imagine in a fast company that has grown as quickly as an organization like Gorillas have, sitting around that table, on the one end, the company is still formalizing. So, not all your processes and structures are in place. On the other end, you want to be a team player around saying, but yeah, we are changing the world. We are changing an industry that for a number of years, I think has lagged quite a bit in terms of the digital online space as well. But then you also have to represent the employee voice to say, hang on, but are we really able to bank this in a responsible way? I had a previous colleague that always spoke about what is the unintended consequences of the decisions that we make around the boardroom table, because I do think that it filters into that balance that we say, but what is reasonable to expect from our people? And that doesn't just go for this particular story. I think in general, I think of big consulting firms where for 2, 3, 4 years, people almost disappear out of your group of friends because they join these consulting firms with these great learning experiences, but they work literally 20-hour days. Do you think that's sustainable? Do you think that's the right way to think about it?
It is a like on the business side, it is a winner takes all mentality. If you are number one, you'll be sustainable and the jobs will be there. If you're number two or three, you'll be bought, or you'll have to bankrupt the company after a couple of years, because it's really not sustainable, the business they're running. And maybe that's a much more societal discussion that we should have of, do we allow those kinds of businesses to operate that may outcompete many of the more traditional taxi drivers, for example, when you talk about Uber or supermarkets, because just, there's a huge amount of money available at the moment in the market. There's billions being invested in these kind of companies, and they're able to just cut prices and make a tremendous loss per individual order that they deliver. I think that's more of a societal issue that we should have a discussion about how far we can go. And I think that makes it interesting why New York is now also implementing legislation specifically to this to this point, Dieter. I'd be curious to know how do you think this will impact the management of individual employees? Say you're delivering these packages at 10:45 and at breakneck speed. What does that mean for the way we talk about performance management for these kind of employees?
I think, Eric, it poses an interesting question around what is it that you're going to measure. I think the age-old saying of, you get what you measure is still going to be very, very true. Am I going to kind of almost mark down that individual because they're 10 minutes late, or they couldn't deliver within the 10 minutes, but they did it in 12, or they did it in 13? Or am I actually going to think, but there's a broader context within which this happens? But what is the expectation that we have as an organization, and what is the expectation that the employee has? So almost that, I'm a very strong believer still in psychological contract and the expressed and expressed expectations between the two parties. I think if we are clear as an organization around who we are, what we expect, what we do, and how things are here, if an employee then makes a realistic decision to say, what, I opt in, this is an environment that I think is beneficial to me as well, and I can live with, can I call them, the boundaries and the parameters that are in place, I think it's a different ballgame. I think it becomes very interesting when these things start popping up that is unexpected, that wasn't explained, or that wasn't transparent in that way as well.
Which brings me in mind, like a certain the delivery in China, where individual employees are punished or not get paid if a delivery is a certain amount of time too late. So then you have a very punitive individual impact on these delivery people, for example, working as in a kind of a gig construction and not getting paid if they're a couple of seconds too late, which I would feel as a customer as well very guilty about, because the place where I live, the bell is very hard to find. So I have constantly people calling me saying, how do I get in? But I think that the broader point is, how do we look at performance for these people? I think you shouldn't look at performance based on an individual trip where you had bad luck or a flat tire, or, there was an ambulance crossing through, so you had to wait a couple of minutes longer. I think it should really be on an aggregated level. If you want to say something about, how fast is someone, you should take it over 10, 50, 100 delivery runs, and then you get a reliable average, I think. So also in the way you implement performance management, I think you should be very conscious of the unintended consequences of the policies that you put in, the way you put it, I think, brilliantly, Dieter. So that's really the tangible advice that I would like to give, that if you work in these kinds of situations, do try to define a performance measurement system. A lot of these apps do pay quite well, and they do try to hire these competitive young people who want a race, who want to beat the clock, and who also have that aptitude. So in that sense, it might not be a bad place to work after all. So with good conscience, I'll keep ordering with them.
And I think that's the right way to go about it, Erik, around the fact that, I think there's solid processes and principles that we've learned over the years that is still applicable in these situations. I think the employment conditions have changed, and I know in a lot of these businesses, whether you view them as permanent employees or as contract employees or as gig employees, ultimately it's a human to company relationship, and there should be these things in place that treats everybody fairly and in an equitable manner. I think that's the kind of important thing to get back to.
With that brings us to our next topic, where I think there's a big group that is there, but that we often don't talk about, Dieter. And they are deskless workers, often referred to as blue-collar deskless workers is the more modern term. This story is about the deskless workforce management platform Connect team raising $120 million US dollars as investment. They work with companies like Food Lockers, like Nike, like McDonald's, and they help to manage these deskless workers, which is about 80% of the workforce, so 80. They enable the organization to broadcast announcements, conduct surveys, schedule shifts, clock in, clock out, do training on an app, celebrate achievement, manage tasks, all mobile first, so that everyone, even though you may not have access to a work email if you work at McDonald's, you do now have access to a self-service HR dashboard. And I like that, and I think I'm wondering, Dieter, is it maybe time to move away from the old, blue collar versus white collar thinking, and move to a more universal way of thinking? Get rid of that blue collar versus white collar distinction.
Finally, I almost want to shout out, Erik, that I think finally we are moving that conversation along, because I think especially in certain parts of the world, there's this notion around the fact that certain types of work is better than others, and there's status subscribed to it. And I think that's resulted in, and I can only use, some emerging economies as an example, where people see the fact that I need a formal education as my vehicle into knowledge work, which is the only way that I will move ahead and break either the poverty cycle that I'm in, or be able to, look after my family and look after myself in the long run. I think we need to move away from these labels around blue collar work, white collar work. I've seen some people refer to it as golden collar work as well, which is kind of, a newer, flashier term around some of these things. I think ultimately we need to ask the question to say there's work to be done. People have got different skill sets, they've got different attributes, they've got different contributions to make. I think what I love about the article that we are talking about is the fact that we are now starting to say that regardless of where your work takes place and what's the nature of your work, there has to be certain elements around you that's beneficial to you in terms of your employee experience. Because as HR, we have been very, very guilty of designing solutions for our traditional campus-based, office-based, knowledge-based environment, as opposed to, regional sales offices, or if you're working in mining or manufacturing sectors. I can give a practical example. I was in an organization where we realized that 70% of our workforce was deskless sales employees, yet 90% of our HR technologies and solutions, you had to be in one of our physical office locations at that time, or logged into a secure VPN network via laptop to be able to access HR services. Actually, we were not servicing the organization at all. We were servicing a snippet of the workforce. So I think we need to move away from that, and we need to stop, subscribing old terms to things that are no longer relevant, because actually there's a huge skills shortage for this type of work in terms of construction and infrastructure development. And, I think we need to make that attractive to people again, because unfortunately, I think a lot of people say, you do that because you cannot do anything else. And that's not the right way. We need to think about that, in my view.
Yeah, and I think as well with the increase in the shortage of more technical skills and technical labor, I do think that a college degree in that sense is very overrated. And also when hiring, that is not a criteria you should look at. Focus instead more on, does this person have the skills and does this person have the work experience that is relevant, instead of do they have a certain certificate or diploma. At the same time, I realize that it is hard, and especially, if you have to sift through thousands of applicants, it might be a very easy criteria to use. But I'm very much not a fan of this idea of, with a college degree you make it, and without a college degree, what can you do? This thinking that you see more and more, I think we really need to move away from it. I don't know if I would use the golden collar as a term, Dieter, but I do think that blue collar and also in the work that we do at the Academy to Innovate HR, we are consciously focusing more and more on the blue collar worker or on the deskless worker in that sense, because I think in a lot of the books that you read, in a lot of the articles that you read, there's a lot of a focus on the white collar kind of consultancy level employees, the professional service who are gig workers, who work from Bali and who produce knowledge, and not on the majority of the people who are working as Deskless people. So I think also for us at the Academy to Innovate HR, I think that's a wake-up call, and that is something that we're actually actively discussing about on how we can do that, how we can do that better. So I look forward to that, and I think this article shows one of the steps of moving forward for these people, for Deskless workers, to also through self-service have an application that is not only designed for the classical white collar that you just mentioned, Dieter, but also for the Deskless workers.
Yeah, I agree, Erik, and I think it's we've barely scratched the surface of the Deskless worker topic, and I think it is a topic that we will be talking about quite frequently as well, because I do think that there's a very, very strong movement in that area and that domain around where that's going to end up. Erik, I can't believe it, but our newsroom is drawing to a close. So thank you very much. Thanks to everybody dialing in. Let us know what are some of the topics that they would love us to talk about as we push the boundaries and push HR forward. Always a pleasure, and look after yourselves as HR professionals as well, I think, during the times that we find ourselves in. So thank you very much.
That's it for the HR Newsroom today. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like this video, and I'll see you in the next one.